All right, what's up everyone? My name is Max Schmarzo. I am a sports scientist and I train some professional athletes, but for your sake and what you're curious about, I like to make science a little more applicable for you, the person trying to train. So the other day we talked about maximal strength training, the process of using heavy weights to train the quality of maximal strength, not to get maximally strong. And we discussed it, and there's some comments and questions, some questions in the comment section. And so I want to briefly give my 2 cents on maybe how you might apply this type of training into your workouts and things you want to consider. So first and foremost, what is maximal strength training? Well, it's anything that's basically evoking maximal motor unit recruitment. Those are the motor units, the muscle fibers, and the innervating neuron that activates those fibers. And when we have all the motor units recruited that are available, we have near maximal or at maximal motor unit recruitment of that muscular belly. So like the quadricep, for example, you can activate all those muscles, maybe doing a really heavy squat. And then because of that, they get activated, they get trained and adapted. But more importantly, it's the activation process that's really important with maximal strength training, because this is going to operate on the higher end of the spectrum of effort. There's not going to be a ton of time under tension. You know what that is. That's when you lift a weight and you're like, oh, 10, whatever, 30 seconds, 4 down, 4 up. Classic bodybuilding stuff. Because there's not a lot of time under tension, the total aggregate tension demands on the muscle might be less than that of something way lighter, right? If you lift 500 pounds but only lasts 1 second, well, if I did 300 pounds and I did a bunch of reps with it, that'd be more total metabolic wear and tear and time under tension. So there's a really high amount of effort dependency on this. There's a high amount of peak force, but the total aggregate amount of force, or the time under tension, is actually lower than traditional methods. This is really important to understand because that's what distinguishes this kind of training from this kind of training, because we have maximal motor unit recruitment under a single effort short burst meaning maybe like 2 seconds, even less, versus time under tension. Yes, you might get maximal motor unit recruitment towards the end, but that's near failure, and the high metabolic demands and the initial central nervous system drive is very different. This is, again, important because it distinguishes between that bodybuilding type method of, hey, I'm lifting to failure, versus I'm going to exert a maximal effort against a really heavy load. So that kind of summarizes our previous video in a very short, somewhat accurate way. If you want to go watch the previous video, go watch it. Some things you need to consider now that I got that through is that, am I doing maximal strength training with a specific movement, a specific muscle, and what you all care about is how many times a week can I implement this into my training. So before we go any further, like when you think about this muscles versus movement, if you're an athlete, I guess any individual out there, I don't really know how many people are just maximally strength training a single muscle. Are you doing a bicep curl? It seems to be kind of dangerous, just because the implications of a single muscle group working, meaning that if it fails under a maximal load, there is no assistive muscles necessarily around it, right? If you miss a squat, you can at least buffer the miss of the squat by changing the loading maybe a little bit more on your back or on your hips to at least lower the weight safely, versus if you're just doing a bicep curl or a quad extension, or knee extension, I should say, it doesn't seem like the wisest of decisions. Now, you can more than likely correct me if I'm wrong. I wouldn't do it, and that's okay. Maybe you would, and I don't really care what you do. You can go for it. So typically it's with a movement, so like a squat or a quarter squat or a deadlift or a bench press or whatever. And how many times a week? So that's the great question everyone wants to know. And this is really important because there is no right answer. Oh my gosh, that's how science works. Everyone wants this specific. You do it 2 times a week, 4 times a week. Well, it doesn't work that way. We can learn from some people, right? We have 2 examples, which is Westside Barbell, which made this method really popular. They would do it 1 time a week for a specific movement. For example, they might do a squat pattern. These guys are power lifters. And they might do it once a week for a squat pattern and maybe once a week for a bench press pattern. But they did other things as well. The Bulgarian weightlifting team, which is very famous for this as well. And I don't know any other Olympic lifting teams because I'm not well versed in that area. I think the Chinese Olympic lifting team does it a lot too. I could be wrong as well. Don't quote me on that. But they would do it like all the time, essentially. But they different types of movements, right? If you're doing cleans or front squats or whatever. The point of it is, and the reason why I'm bringing this up, is because if you are doing this, a heavy maximal strength lift, you aren't doing something else. And you might not be a power lifter, you might not have a specific strength goal, you might be an athlete, someone who likes to lift and do other things. So as an athlete, we do many other things in our life outside of lifting, right? We have many, many other things. We, play our sport, for training, we have practice. You care about your readiness to actually perform in practice so you can earn playing time. And you lift basically when you can, and depending on the type of season, you might lift more or less in the off season or preseason. So you only have so much time in your lifting, and there's many different qualities that go into your sport beyond just, how maximally strong I can be. Yeah, it might be helpful, but it's not the end all be all. So what comes up here is with maximal strength training, while it is very beneficial, it itself doesn't always lend itself to being utilized tons and tons and tons in season simply, or even as an athlete, simply due to the fact that if you are lifting something maximally heavy and you're doing it even once a week, there are risks involved with any sort of lifting, obviously. But if you've ever lifted heavy, you do know you get some aches and pains and some soreness. And if that's taking away from your readiness, well, that might not be something you would like to do. If this is something you're just adding into your training and you can have a lot of flexibility in your readiness because you're not playing a sport and you're not an athlete, well, sure, you can take a couple of days off because you have more aches and pains. This doesn't mean we can't use maximal strength training with our athletes. You just have to consider the things that come with it, the risks, the variables, and other things alike. So here's an example I've used with my athletes because that's what everyone's going to finally want to get to. What I do first and foremost is I understand which movement works the right muscles, but is very kind to them, right? Let's just make that a smiley face. If you've ever lifted weights, you know sometimes some movements don't work well with you and some movements do work well with you. They have excellent form. They are really good at doing the movement. They're comfortable with the movement. They know as an athlete when they are going to miss the weight or successfully lift the weight, and you as a coach can really trust them. You're like, yay, they're really great at that movement. Wonderful. And then remember that range is between 85 to 100%. And if we assume failure, it's also somewhat connected to aches and pains and soreness in terms of lifting, or maybe higher risk tolerance. Maybe we rarely do the 100% realm, but we stick it between 85, maybe even 80 to like 90%. And I call this a plus single, meaning like, hey, that was a really heavy weight. It made me work, but I probably could have done it for maybe 1 or even 2 more reps. Heck, maybe 3 if I was really going for it. But I don't need to. Why? Because it's heavy enough to evoke that high motor unit recruitment, but it's not so tiring that it's going to kill my readiness. I'm still able to be ready. Yay. And guess what? I can do one at 85%, and that felt good. I can do another one, and I can do another one. And then wonderful, I've done 3 exposures of a high motor unit recruitment, and I'm used to it. My work capacity is ready for it, and I get the potential benefits of it. Now, what's really cool about that is that we can make this a little easier for our athletes to utilize in their training because we have a nice movement we like to do. For example, a trap bar deadlift is one of the lifts I've had an athlete use. And what we do is, hey, we want to make it so we're really, really working hard. And I steal from Westside Barbell. I like to use 3 sets. Why do I like to use 3 sets? Well, it seems like after the first set, the second and third set, when we're working in that like 85% range, seems to be even better. But at the 4th, 5th, and 6th set, it just becomes a time issue because you're basically resting maybe 2 minutes between each set, or maybe 90 seconds. If we drag this out to, I don't know, 5 sets at a certain point in time, my whole day is being taken up because I have other things I need to do as an athlete, and I can't just exert myself to be sore and tired. It might be different if you are trying to get just sheer maximal strength and you're just a lifter and whatever. I'm not here to talk about that. You can take that how you like. So I like to do 3 sets, maybe a 4th set depending on how the first 3 went and depending on the weight. I typically don't do the 100% 1RM. Not a fan of it. For athletes, I myself do it because I don't treat myself like a professional athlete because I can deal with my flexibility of readiness, and I think it's fun to lift heavy weights. And as a guy who likes to lift weights, I think it's competitive, cool. But as my athlete, they want to play sports and they want to be ready for their sport. So 85 to maybe that 90% based on their comfortability. I'm typically just doing one rep. I rarely do 2. or 3. And the reason why is because we can just do one great rep over and over and over and over again, and we can have, maybe 5 exposures to that stimulus, versus if I do 2 reps, I run the risk of maybe the second and third rep just not being as good. I'd rather have just one excellent rep. I almost treat this in a way that I would treat my sprinting or my jumping, right? I want one really good rep, let's take a break and do it again. If you sprint and then run again after, like, I don't know, immediately after your set, that becomes conditioning. I don't want this to be conditioning, I want this maximal exertion. And typically I do this once a week. Right, once a week, maybe twice a week, kind of depending on what they're doing and the movement. For example, maybe we'll do one more of a squat pattern and one more of a hinge pattern. And again, it's kind of on that lower end. If I do that 85 or 80% realm, of course I can do it twice a week. It's not getting in the way of much. What also happens is the more we get used to this, our work capacity goes up. We'll call that WC. That's supposed to be a C. And because our work capacity goes up, we get used to lifting this kind of way, and we have the ability to do it more often. And what I like to do is in the off season, we like to build the capacity to handle that movement that we so like and enjoy and think that we can use in our training, that we can use in the end season. So we might do this end season, maybe 2 times a week. And then, end season, off season, 2 times a week. We'll say off season. And then end season, we stick with that movement that we've been practicing and we're really good at. And maybe we'll use it every 1 to 2 weeks, kind of based on availability and their schedule. If I wait too long, I go once every 4 weeks, well then that lift is gonna maybe make me sore because my work capacity has gone down. So we wanna do enough to keep our work capacity relevant, enough that allows us to have maximal strength benefits, but also we don't want necessarily to be so distant from it that when we do it again, it makes us achy and sore. And the reason why we do that same movement we like so much, especially in season, oops, as I lose my marker there. The reason why we do that in season is because we know how our body responds to it. So hopefully that clears up some stuff on how I like to use maximal strength training with some of my athletes, and maybe you can steal some of that and use it with your athletes. Totally up to you. If you made it this far, I appreciate you guys as always. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoy. Feel free to like, subscribe, and share. All right. Peace out, y'all.